Good morning, 4th grade. Welcome back to our Read Aloud of Holes. So yesterday we saw that Zero left. Zero tried to escape and ran away towards the mountains. So we're going to be faced with that a lot in these chapters, and we're going to see Stanley's going to have a really big choice to make about this. So I want to just jump right into it because it's a really great chapter. Chapter 31. Stanley angrily dug his shovel into the dirt. He was angry at everyone. Mr. Pendansky, the warden, Zigzag, X-Ray, and his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. But mostly he was angry at himself. He knew he should never let Zero dug part of his hole for him. He still could have taught him how to read. If Zero could dig all day and still have the strength to learn, then he could have been able to dig all day and still have the strength to teach. What should he do, he thought? What he should do, he thought, was go out after Zero. But he didn't. None of the others helped him dig Zero's hole, and he didn't expect them to. Zero had been helping him dig his hole. Now he had to dig Zero's. He remained out on the lake, digging during the hottest part of the day, long after everyone else had gone in. He kept an eye out for Zero, but Zero didn't come back. It would have been easy to go out after Zero. There was nobody to stop him, but he kept thinking that that's what he should do. Maybe he could climb to the top of Big Thumb. And even if they did find refuge on Big Thumb, he thought, they'd still have to come back here eventually. Then they both have to face the warden and her rattlesnake fingers. Instead, he came up with a better idea. Although he didn't quite have it figured out yet. He thought maybe he could make a deal with the warden. He'd tell her where he really found the gold too if she wouldn't scratch Zero. He wasn't sure how he'd make this deal without getting himself in deeper trouble. He might just say, tell me where you found her or I'll scratch you too. Plus, it would mean X-Ray would get in trouble too. She'd probably scratch him up as well. X-Ray would be out to get him for the next 16 months. He dug his shovel into the dirt. By the next morning, Zero still hadn't returned. Stanley saw one of the counselors sitting guard by one of the water spigots out by the shower wall. Stanley had 2 black eyes and a bandage over his nose. I always knew he was stupid, Stanley heard him say. Stanley was required to dig only one hole the next day, and as he did, he kept a constant watch out for Zero, but never saw him. Once again, he considered going out on the lake to look for him, but he began to realize it was already too late. His only hope was that Zero found God's thumb on his own. It wasn't possible. His great-grandfather had found it. For some reason, his great-grandfather felt the urge to climb the top of the mountain. Maybe Zero would feel the same urge. If it was the same mountain, if water was still there. He tried to convince himself it wasn't possible. There had been a storm just a few days ago. Maybe Big Thumb was actually some kind of natural water tower that caught and stored the rain. It wasn't possible. He returned to his tent to find the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendansky all waiting for him. Have you seen Zero, the warden asked him. No. No sign of him at all? No. Do you have any idea where he went? No. You know you're not doing him any favors if you're lying, said Mr. Sir. He can't survive out there for more than a day or two. I don't know where he is. All 3 stared at Stanley as if they were trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Mr. Pendansky's face was so swollen he could barely open his eyes. They were just slits. You sure he has no family, the warden asked Mr. Pendansky. He's a ward of the state. Is there anyone who might ask questions? Some social worker who took an interest in him? He had nobody, Mr. Pendansky said. He was nobody. The warden thought a moment. Okay. Destroy all of his records. Mr. Pendansky nodded. He was never here, said the warden. Mr. Sir nodded. Can you get into the state files from our computer? She asked Mr. Pendansky. I don't want anyone in the AG's office knowing that he was here. I don't think I can erase him completely from all the state files, said Mr. Pendansky. Too many cross-references. But I can make it so it would be very difficult for anyone to ever find a record of him. Like I said, no one will ever look. No one cares about Hector Zeroni. Good, said the warden. 2 days later, a new kid was assigned to Group D. His name was Brian, but X-Ray called him Twitch because he was always fidgeting. Twitch was assigned Zero's bed in Zero's crate. Vacancies don't last long on Camp Green Lake. Twitch had been arrested for stealing a car. I never planned to, steal one, he told him. But sometimes, I'll be walking past a real nice car parked in a deserted area, and, I'll just start twitching. If you think I twitch now, you should see me when I'm around a car. Next thing you know, I'm behind the wheel. Still in his scratchy sheets. It occurred to him that his cot no longer smelled bad. He wondered if the smell had gone away or if he had just gotten used to it. Hey, caveman, said Twitch. Do we really have to get up at 4:30? You get used to it, Stanley told him. It's the coolest part of the day. He tried not to think about Zero. It was too late. Either he'd made it to Big Thumb, or... What worried him the most, however, was that it was too late. He worried... wasn't that it was too late. What worried him the most was really ate at his insides was the fear that it wasn't too late. What if Zero was still alive, desperately clawing across the dirt, searching for water? He tried to force the image out of his mind. The next morning out on the lake, Stanley listened as Mr. Sir told Twitch the requirements for his hole. As wide and as deep as your shovel. Twitch fidgeted, his fingers jumped against the wooden shaft of the shovel, and his neck moved side to side. The water truck came shortly after sunrise. Stanley got in line behind Magnet ahead of Twitch. What if it's not too late? He watched Mr. Sir fill X-Ray's canteen. The image of Zero crawling across the hot dirt remained in his head. What could he do about it? Even if Zero was somehow still alive after more than 4 days, how would Stanley ever find him? It would take days. He'd need a car. Or a pickup truck. A pickup truck with a tank of water in the back. Stanley wondered if Mr. Sir had left the keys in the ignition. He slowly backed away from the line and then circled over to the side of the truck. He looked through the window. The keys were there, dangling in the ignition. Stanley felt his fingers start to twitch. He took a deep breath to steady himself and tried to think clearly. He'd never driven before. But how hard could it be? This is really crazy, he told himself. Whatever he did, he knew he'd have to do it quickly before Mr. Sir noticed. It's too late, he told himself. Zero couldn't have survived. But what if it wasn't too late? He took another deep breath. Think about this, he told himself. But there wasn't time to think. He flung up the door to the truck and climbed quickly inside. Hey, shouted Mr. Sir. He turned the key and stepped on the gas pedal. The engine revved. The truck didn't move. He pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared, but the truck was motionless. Mr. Sir came running around the side of the truck. The door was still open. Put it in gear, shouted Twitch. The gear shift was on the floor next to the seat. Stanley pulled the lever back until the arrow pointed to the letter D for drive. The truck lurched forward. Stanley jerked back against the seat and tightly gripped the wheel as the truck accelerated. His foot was pressed to the floor. The truck went faster and faster across the dry lake bed. It bounced over a pile of dirt. Suddenly, Stanley was slammed forward and then instantly backwards as an airbag exploded in his face. He fell out of the open door and onto the ground. He'd driven straight into a hole. He lay on the dirt, staring at his truck, which stuck lopsided out of the ground. He sighed. He couldn't blame his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-grandfather for this one. This time it was his own fault, 100%. He had just probably done the stupidest thing ever had done in his short, miserable life. He managed to get to his feet. He was sore, but he didn't think he had any broken bones. He glanced back at Mr. Sir, who remained where he was, staring at Stanley. He ran. His canteen was strapped around his neck. It banged against his chest as he ran, and every time it hit against him, it reminded him that it was empty, empty, empty. He slowed to a walk. As far as he could tell, no one was chasing him. He could hear voices coming from the back of the truck, but couldn't make out the words. Occasionally, he'd hear the revving of the engine, but the truck wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. He headed in what he thought was the direction of the big thumb. He couldn't see it through the haze. Walking helped calm him down and allowed him to think clearly. He doubted he could make it to Big Thumb. With no water in his canteen, he didn't want to risk his life on the hope that he'd find refuge there. He'd have to return to camp. He knew that, but he was in no hurry. It would be better to return later, after everyone had a chance to calm down. And as long as he'd come this far, he might as well look for Zero. He decided he would walk as long as he could, until he was too weak to go any further. Then he'd turn around and go back. He smiled as he realized that that wouldn't quite work. He would only go halfway as far as he thought he could go, and then that he would still have the strength to return. He'd still have to make a deal with the warden, tell her where he could find Kate Barlow's lipstick tube, and beg for mercy. He was surprised by now at how far their holes extended. He couldn't even see the camp compound anymore, but he kept passing holes. Just when he thought he passed the last hole, he came across another cluster of them a little farther away. Still, he found himself looking down in each hole he passed. He didn't admit to himself what he was looking for. But after more than an hour had gone by, he thought he'd surely seen the last hole. But then off to the left, he saw another cluster of them. He didn't actually see the holes. He saw the mounds of dirt that surrounded them. He stepped over the mounds and looked into the first hole. His heart stopped. Down at the bottom was a family of yellow-spotted lizards. Their large red eyes looked up at him. He leaped back over the mound and ran. He didn't know if they were chasing after him. He thought he might have seen one leap out of the hole. He ran until he couldn't run anymore, then collapsed. They hadn't come after him. He sat there a while and caught his breath. As he got back to his feet, he thought he noticed something on the ground, maybe 50 yards away. It didn't look like much, just a big rock, but in a land of nothingness, any little thing seemed unusual. He slowly walked towards it. The encounter with lizards had made him very cautious. It turned out to be an empty sack of sunflower seeds. He wondered if it was the same one Magnet had stolen from Mr. Sir, although it didn't seem likely. He turned it inside out and found one seed stuck to the burlap. Lunch. I wonder if he'll find 0. I guess we'll find out tomorrow.